Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
So today's topic, Ian, you kind of came up with this last week when we were chatting, sort of thinking of a name for it because it's kind of a long subject matter. So I just kind of put, are ghosts and spirits aware of the here and now? So our here and now as opposed to their here and now, right?
Which is a very interesting question.
So that being said, I've kind of had this discussion numerous times with people. I'm sure you've probably had it in the past doing investigations and talking to people. They often ask questions about, do they know that, we're here, or do they recognize the house or the building or the location? And it's kind of just, I guess it's just up in the air. I mean,
it's one of those unanswered questions that paranormal teams out there are looking for.
Right.
It's just unanswered because if you ask that question to 10 different paranormal teams, you're probably going to get 10 different answers.
Right. Or some variation of similarity, but still, different aspects of, right?
Yeah.
And it depends on when they pass, because we talked about this a little bit last week too, but we've sort of talked about this, is would they have any prior knowledge or knowledge of today? If you died in 1860, how would you even begin to perceive today? That's kind of the question. It's like, are they aware of this current time? And I'm of the thought, from my experience, no, they are not.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm sort of split on that theory, because I've sort of experienced both ends of it.
Right.
Here at home, we have a couple of spirits that have followed us home, and they say, don't bring your work home with you, but we did. But it's cool because they're kind, decent spirits. So we've got no problem with them being here. But in retrospect to having them acknowledge to us that they're here, it's like, okay, they do the energy thing, they'll shut off the TV, they'll change the TV channels. Right. But I've also had my shirt pulled physically.
Right.
Saying, hey, I'm here, look at me, pay attention to me. So there's a physical aspect that they're certainly aware that I'm there because my shirt was pulled.
Right.
But I've also experienced going on locations where, as I mentioned, I think it was last week, talking about the little girl Sarah Ann at Fort George, who was the dominant spirit at the fort, and how she likes to follow the ghost tours along that take place there. And when the tour goes into the tunnel at the back of the fort, she stops because that tunnel did not exist when she was alive, living there at the fort with her family. So it's
yeah.
I've seen both ends of this topic. So again, it's sort of this unexplained.
Right. It's how do you explain? So, and there's the thing too, like I have also been a party to the same type of activity, touching, pulling of hair, all kinds of things. I had an attachment for better part of 10 years, and apparently he's still around. He's just not active like he used to be. But again, they're aware of us, our energy. But I'm not 100% sure they're aware, like, if your spirit in your house was able to go, oh, hey, Ian, there's a bookshelf behind you, right? I think that if the attachment is to the energy signature, not necessarily to the environment. Now, in some cases, yes, they are attached to the environment, but there's an energy signature attached to that environment as well, right? Because everything in this universe, and this is not just our planet, but this is the entire universe, registers an energy signature. So you're going to have different interactions depending on your vibration level, I believe. I've kind of seen this in action with other mediums, other sensitives, that we will pick up on different things. Sometimes we'll pick up on the same things, but I really like having a second and a third, even I don't care how many other mediums or sensitive people are on an investigation. I think the more, the better. I'm not, I don't have to be the only person going, hey, I feel this information, right?
Exactly.
I like it when other people can be there and are sensitive, because I don't pick up on everything, and I kind of know where my vibrational, level is. I kind of get it. I understand it. It took me a long time to figure it out, but I very rarely, and I've mentioned this previously in other shows, I very rarely pick up on children. I very rarely pick up on, positive things. I mean, there's nothing positive about passing on, but some pass on in gentler ways than others. I never get those gentle ways, right? I always get the low, deep, dark, vibrations that, put people into mental institutions, or they're murderers. So I'm particularly special in that, but I'm not. I mean, there's always people that pick that up. But then I have friends who, just being around them too, like their vibration levels are way higher than mine, right? So, and I can feel it when I'm around them, like they're just buzzy with this, high output energy. I tend to be more low and I'm on a low vibrational scale, and I know that. They're on a much higher vibration scale. And so they will tend to pick up on different things. They will pick up more on children. Children generally have very high energy signatures, and they'll pick up on, people who were possibly in a much higher energy level. I know that this kind of crosses over too for people who do believe in things like angels and archangels and all of that sort of stuff too, that they tend to feel that, that's a very high vibration level. So you pick up on a much higher vibrational level. So it's, angels and all of these things. Because I don't follow that, I have no marker for that, right? I can't go, yes, I agree, because I have no way of even deciphering that. I do not vibrate at that level. So, for me, it's always where it is. But that's kind of the thing. So the more people you have, the better, focus you're going to have, right? The better
for sure.
It's a bit like doing a Venn diagram, right? The more information you have, and then you can analyze that, you can sort of find that common denominator or that sort of middle ground. And I think it's the same thing, like even in your case, right? You've got these spirits that followed you home. I try to make sure that they never follow me home. It's just a thing. I don't want them here. I don't need them. I have enough visitations going on. I don't need them in my house. But at the same time, I do feel like all of the opportunities that I've been exposed to have never given me pause to believe that they're fully aware of beyond their own timeline. Right. So that's my belief. It may not jive with everyone else's, but I've never had an experience where I've, interacted with a spirit that, say, passed away in, like I said, 1860, and they can tell me, their whatever it is they need to tell me. I mean, it's never a conversation, and let's just be clear about that. For me, it's never a conversation. It's very one-sided. It doesn't go away, and that's kind of a weird thing too, right? It's like I got these little filing cabinets somewhere in here that are storing this information, and I may not remember it verbatim, but I certainly am able to recall it. But I'm not sure how, with yourself, like when you've been on a investigation, if you've ever had an experience where you fully believe that they're 100% aware that they're not in their own timeline when they passed. Have you ever had anything like that?
Not to say 100%, no. As I mentioned, the little girl Sarah Ann at Fort George, that's probably the closest that I've come to that where you realize that, she sees that tunnel at the back of Fort George does not exist in her timeline.
Right.
But as you were saying, it's what I get is the same as you, except my technique comes through our paranormal scientific equipment, rather than myself having any kind of abilities. It comes through technology.
Right.
Again, it comes down to, okay, my shirt gets pulled, et cetera, et cetera. Do they see what is in our world? And it's interesting that you mentioned the bookshelf, because there was an experience we had a few years back with one of our adopted family ghosts here.
Friends.
That, again, he wanted to just let us know he was here, wanted to say hi. And the way he did that was he pulled one of these books off the shelf, boom, threw it halfway across the room.
Right.
And yeah, we just looked, and it was like, we didn't actually see it happen because we were actually watching television at the time, which is at the other end of the room. So obviously we didn't see behind us at the bookshelf.
Right.
And but we heard it, and we both turned and looked, and it's like, what on earth was that? And we walked over, and yep, here's this book lying on the floor that there's no way that it's just going to drop off the shelf and go halfway across the room. It had to physically be thrown.
Right. And so that kind of gives you maybe they do have the ability to interact within our own timeline.
Yeah.
I know, like, I have experienced those kinds of things myself, right? Like, you go somewhere, you have some sort of, there's stone thrown at you, or there's some sort of physicality that they clearly are able to perhaps interact with our current timeline, but we're not going to know. Right?
Is it just a moment that they can connect, or it's one of the unknown? It's one of the unknown mysteries.
It is, and I mean,
do they see it all the time? Do they only see it for a brief moment when they want to throw a book off the shelf?
Who
knows?
Honestly, we're not going to be able to answer that question.
Yeah,
Science can't even answer that question at this point. Right? It's just there's feelings that make me feel like maybe some have more of an energy signature than others. And, we could kind of divide that up in, like even a poltergeist, right? Because let's just use a poltergeist as an example, because they can, for the most part, they are the ones that are known to be able to physically manifest their energy enough to move objects in our present timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So, what creates that? Like, what makes one spirit more powerful in terms of its energy than another? Again, don't even know where to begin with that. I mean, that is something that you can't really test. Right? It's like, how do you even begin to think of those things? I mean,
my head hurts even thinking about it.
Well, sometimes there's just things that we don't know. And I love science. I'm a science person. I love my science. But at the same time, we know very little in terms of our own capabilities. We know very little in terms of, I mean, there's a lot of people doing work in physics and energy signatures and all of those things. But, and you know, let's be honest here. We can go back 1,000 years, a few thousand years. We can go back to Greek philosophers and Greek scientists and Chinese scientists and philosophers. And even then, they were talking about this stuff, right? So it's kind of the thought of, it's been going on a really, really long time, but I don't think anybody's been able to definitively say yes or no, scientifically or otherwise at this point.
No, but you know, I wish there was some kind of a paranormal library put together.
Yeah,
Because you've got all these paranormal groups, you've got people like yourself who are sensitive. We are slowly gathering information, but the problem is that at least in the paranormal world, that everybody has got such egos that, oh, well, my evidence is better than your evidence. It's like, we're never going to get the answers until you drop the egos and we pool all this information that we've all been gathering slowly over the years into some kind of a central paranormal library.
Right. And I think, you know, like, I know even with some of the things that I've done, it's pissed off some, you know, other paranormal investigators or people who consider, you know, and here's the thing. I mean, I take what and this is it. I take what I do. You know, this is not a job. This is not you know, I'm not getting paid for any of this stuff, right? This is personal experience. I love to interact. And like I said, I like having people out to do these things. So I know I've been lambasted numerous times online by people who are like, I don't understand why you do public investigations and how that you can even get information, and you can't, because you can't control the environment and you can't do all this. And I'm like, yeah, but you can. You just have to set out the ground rules for people. They're first time people. Somebody, you know, people have to learn somewhere. So if I can offer them a situation where they can come into a controlled environment, this is not just willy-nilly. We're not just letting everybody do whatever they want and run rampant through a building. It's pretty controlled. We usually break it into groups so that it's manageable. And we have several people, whether it's someone like yourself who's really great with equipment, or several intuitives, mediums, and someone with equipment. We break it into groups and we make it manageable, and we pick certain areas of buildings and we go there and we spend, you know, 2 hours in one spot. And 2 hours is nothing. I mean, sometimes you can get absolutely not a single thing in 2 hours, but we do that. And then we switch places in the building. So we go around and we do this and we overlap, and then we come back, and at the end of the night, we'll spend an hour or 2 hours going over what everyone's experiences were, and then we talk about that. And I think that that's valuable information, because just because someone isn't experienced with using a K2, or, you know, maybe their abilities are just something that they're just understanding and starting to tune into, these kinds of situations give people opportunity, but it also gives us, as people who are involved in paranormal investigation or paranormal, you know, circumstances, a broader brush, you know, to work with. It kind of baffles me when people get into these little cliques, and they, you know, they got these little cliques, and they're like, oh, they don't want to share their information, or they get jealous because, you know, somebody else is doing something similar to them, you know.
Exactly.
And I see this all the time. Like, I've seen people cut me off on Facebook because I write books, and I write books about the paranormal, and I write kids' books about the paranormal. And then, you know, they might be doing the same thing. And it seems like it's at cross purposes, because now, you know, my book's out there and their book's out there, and maybe their book won't get read because and it's like, you know what? That's really petty. I asked a few people over the last week who do this, you know, what their experiences were. And it was very similar to what you and I came up with. And I had a couple of people say, I believe that they do know, because how can they, like you just said, throw that book off of the bookshelf, or, push a glass across the table, or any of that. Like, they would have to know that those items are present in that moment.
Right.
So it makes for a good argument. Right? It's like, part of me wants to go, it makes complete sense. But, there's part of me that goes, okay, and I can't answer that. It makes me crazy.
Because there is no answer at this time.
There's no answer, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's really no hard and fast answer, proof, cut and dry. You can't just go, yes, that is this, or no. And that's the whole thing with science, right? And I think what happens with people who get too, what's the word I want to say? Science is fabulous, but there's still a certain amount of things that we can't explain, as I mentioned earlier. But to become so rooted in the disbelief instead of being open to the possibilities of belief. I mean, let's face it, when we are looking at things to prove in a scientific format, we come up with a hypothesis. A hypothesis is simply our ideas, our thoughts, our possibilities. There's nothing scientific or concrete about a hypothesis in its early inception. So then we come up with a study, and we do a study. And then from that study, again, much like a Venn diagram, which are, famous in studies, we end up with a number of controlled situations with a baseline that we can now look at as, if we had 10 of this and 10 of that, and we put it together and we have 20, and, 5 of it was this and 7 of it was that, well, mathematically, the 7 is going to win out over the 5, right? Because it's a higher percentage or a higher number. So we have that same issue here. I mean, to me, it's, the more people I ask, some people are like, yeah, I think that they can. And like I said, I sort of in my mind go, well, I don't know. But then the more I think about it, the more it makes some sense that there has to be some sort of physical possibility,
right,
that they are aware of perhaps certain things. But what are those things, but then I see patterns, and you have to sort of think about it too. Is it residual energy, or is it an actual spirit, right? Because you get sort of, Casa Loma is a good example of that, right? The staircase in the office, in the study, Palat's study, where
right,
he has the secret staircase that goes up
right,
beside the fireplace, which was essentially a servant's staircase, right? So they would come and go through that. And you walk up and down that, you can feel that energy there. You can feel how, you can look at the stairs, how worn they were. You can look at all of those things, and you can feel that energy because the building is retaining it. But is that a spirit? No. That's an energy pattern, right? So those kinds of things, they cannot interact, right? They don't change per se. I suspect that all of the people marching up and down that staircase now, when it's not COVID, all the visitors through, and that the building is now holding on to that energy as well. So if you go in the off hours to do an investigation at Casa Loma, and I'm not even sure you can do it anymore. I know they used to allow it, but you can feel that energy. It's almost like, okay, so is that energy over the last, however many years it's been open to the public, or is that energy from the time when it was actively used? That is really difficult to decipher now, because you've had hundreds of thousands of people literally traipsing up and down a staircase for the last 50 years or more.
And with interaction, it's also interesting to think about, is it common things that they would recognize? They would recognize a
book.
book. They would recognize water.
Yes. Perhaps not bottled water, though.
Well, not bottled, obviously, back in 1860, but water is water. A book is a book.
Yeah.
It's something that,
like a cup or a glass, or
so in a way, it's almost in terms of at least intelligent. If that intelligence is there, you've got trigger objects all around us. Yeah.
And that's something too. It's, I think that, I think when we go into investigations, we often forget that. We bring trigger objects with us, right? Like a lot of people will be like, oh, okay, I'm going to bring this teddy bear, or I'm going to bring a doll, or I'm going to bring something as a trigger object. And we forget that, truthfully, anybody in 1830, 1840 isn't going to know what a teddy bear is. They didn't exist, right? They would tell that it was a toy, perhaps, and they could see, but the teddy bear had not yet been invented.
Right.
So, like those Boo Buddies and all of those bears, those things, right? Well, okay, so we're interacting with children that perhaps may understand what it is. I mean, I think a kid would always know, depending on it, but they have nothing to compare that to.
No, so they wouldn't know what a teddy bear is, but they would be drawn to, oh, here's this cute little thing.
But would they? Because we forget, too, that in 1820 and 1830, toys were not what they are today.
No,
right?
No, right.
So our concept of, me going, oh, look, I brought you
Mr. Potato Head.
Right? They would not even know what that was. There is nothing for them in their existence to be able to relate to this. So that's kind of my question is, like, here's a ball, okay? Balls have been around a long time. They're always a good trigger object, right? But at the same time, you have to think seriously about where you're going and what it is that you're trying to achieve. And I think that, so many people go in with these Boo Buddies and they're like, touch the bear. And if that child or adult has no real knowledge of what that is, they would be very hesitant to even approach it. And
well, that's interesting because one of the investigations we did at the Hamilton Custom House, there's a child spirit named David, who's actually one of the ones here that followed us home. Okay. But that's a long story. That's another story.
So you took him home, so he's not in the Custom House anymore.
Yeah, yeah. But anyways, he became our focus every time we would go to the Custom House because there was such an interaction between himself and us. Right. And that's something you talk about, the toys and a ball. And we asked him, what's your favorite toy? And that was his response was, my favorite toy is ball.
Ball, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, because so many people do not think about anything in a historical context, right? And I'm not going to say all people, but I've been on, quite a few investigations I've been asked to, accompany or join or do. And I'm always like, guys, they're not going to know what that is. And they're like, well, what do you mean? It's like, and I'm like, there's no context for them, to understand what that is. Like something like a ball, we know has been around a long time. Games and things that children played with. If I was to bring a stump doll in, colonial kids in America would know what that is. That was something that was common for them. But, if I was to roll in with my porcelain doll over there, who's, she's beautiful and she's from the late 1800s, are they still in their time where they've had no access to something that resembles that, something as complex like a teddy bear, or, again, we try to rationalize it. We're like, well, they might know what it is because they're going to think it's a soft, cute toy. try something. But again, if that would be like us going to a country we've never been in our lives, and they show us something that we have no context
No idea
for,
what it is. Yeah.
and we're like, I don't know what that is, right? Because we have had no experience with it. So I think that too also is important when you're doing an investigation and when you're attempting to, try to figure out, are they able to communicate with us? Do they understand what's happening in the here and now? Or are they tied to their own time? And again, I guess it's just an individual experience, right? It's like,
Yeah. There appears to be there's no answer yet.
no.
As I say, I wish there was this library put together of everybody's evidence that we could sit down and go over everything, and then you could start.
That we should do.
Yeah.
Is create an online archive of people's, information. Easy enough for me to set up a website to do that. We could certainly do that. And then we can start putting our own information into it. And people can simply send us, send an email or fill out a form and put whatever, and then we can start to compile it into categories as well too, right? So that maybe then we can start to see, where similarities start to overlap. I don't think there's anybody really out there doing that. There might be a few people who have compiled some things, but they're kind of hoarding it in their basement or their attic or wherever it might be. But there really isn't anything out there. And that
as I say, there's so much ego out there among the various paranormal teams that, as I mentioned, my evidence is better than yours. It's like,
yeah, and
that has to stop. And we need to join all of this information together.
Right. And it's very typical though in many things that appear to lay credence to unattainable things. Right? The science world's like that too, right? So people in science who they've made a discovery, they've made something, and they don't want to share that information with anyone because it's theirs and it's theirs alone, and it's like, it's mine, and I don't want to share. And it becomes literally an ego thing, right? Because we all learn from each other. And even in the paranormal world, one paranormal investigator, well, they might be better at what they do in terms of their professionalism, that I will not, I will never discredit that, right? It takes a lot to be very professional in a realm that a lot of people don't believe in.
Yeah.
And so to be credible and to be, to be ethical and to be, to remain professional, ethics comes into it too. There's a lot of ethics. There's certain ethical things, it's like, again, how do we know if they can interact? Well, let's just say that we start shouting and yelling and being belligerent to a spirit. Do they know what we're saying? Or is it just because our vibrational level has become negative that they're impacted by that? Right? So if we're getting angry or upset or we're yelling at them or something's happening, are they actually aware of what it is that we say? Or is it just that shift in our energy that, like, if they come to us and they're, very negative, or they're very, hateful, or they're the opposite, they're, lovely and you want to be around them, is it the same thing for them? And I would tend to say yes, since they pick up on our energy and possibly, use our energy as a, a connecting device. But, again, it's an interesting topic to raise. And, for any folks that are watching, or, if you want to just stick a comment in, Honestly, we don't watch this on Facebook while we're doing it. So if you're making comments live while we're doing it, we're actually on the Zoom platform, just because there's too much of a lag on Facebook for us between the Zoom platform and the Facebook platform. So, but I always go back and I read the comments.
We can see the comments afterwards.
Yes, yes. So if people are making comments, I'm happy to respond to them within reason, of course. And you know what? If you have something that doesn't jive with what we're saying, we're okay with that too. Like we're not the be all end all of the paranormal world here. We're just doing this because we love what we do. And I think that everybody that contributes is, it's a positive thing, right? It's positive for everyone. And it's especially positive for people who are interested in the subject, who don't have, that person, or they don't have the opportunity because other groups or teams or things don't let them in and don't let them do it. I mean, there's a number of places that do public investigations. Some of those are good, bad, or indifferent. I've been on them. I've bought tickets for them. Some of them are just a free-for-all, and there's really no investigation going on. It's just people running around doing whatever. There's not a controlled environment. And that can work too. I mean, I've picked up things, even when there's 100 people around me and nothing is controlled. And, but I think the idea is to just, if you're interested, get out there, experience it, and, and then watch or listen or, check out.
Learn from those who do have the experience.
Yeah, people that do, right? And I mean, I'm always the first person to say, I am happy to learn from somebody else. Things that, like, heck, I don't know everything. That's for darn sure. I certainly don't know everything about this, even though I've grown up with this around me all the time. But it doesn't mean that I understand it some days. Some days I don't understand it at all. So
yeah,
so there's
well, I've had people contact me saying, they want to get into paranormal investigation, but they have no idea how to proceed with it. And I always tell them, become educated in the field, learn from those who have the experience. And by what I mean by become educated, I don't mean by watching the television programs.
No, those are all edited within an inch of their lives. And, and I mean, I got to say, I've been on some of those shows, right? So, when we're doing an investigation in real time, it's really happening. It is happening. But the shows get edited because we could be there for 10 hours and only get like 2 things, right? So, an hour's worth of footage needs to be edited to find, to keep it interesting. But the other thing is too, though, Enos, like saying that though too, right, is that some groups are not open to new people coming in. They're not open to allowing this. I know that, like I said, when COVID is over and we're able to get back to our thing, I miss our public investigations. Like those were always, I really enjoyed those, right? And I really enjoyed being able to go to a location and open it up for people, especially new people. Lay the ground rules out, within reason. Like I always tell people, if you're afraid, if you are truly petrified, because people do get very scared. Sometimes it's your imagination because you just don't know how to control it and it gets the better of you and you freak out. I always tell people though, if you're really afraid, don't scream, don't run, just, come to one of the people leading you, right? So if you're in a group and people, you're doing a sort of a controlled investigation and something happens and it really freaks you out, don't just scream and run. It's like, acknowledge what's happened.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.